Warning: this is a true crime channel and is not for the faint of heart or the easily impressionable. This video may contain details that some viewers may find highly disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You have been warned.
Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel where I still don't have any of the proper equipment. I refuse to follow the script. And where I am only doing this video because Manic Idiot decided to piss me the fuck off today in his live stream for suggesting that he could encroach on my territory of all things that is blood, gore, true crime, and horror. So, guess what? We are doing the St. Valentine's Day Massacre today that happened in Chicago in 1929. I'm not even gonna beat around the bush with this. This is solely on Manic. I wasn't gonna do this video today, not the one I'm working on, nor is it one I was even gonna do this year. So, thanks to Manic, this is happening. So you know the drill, you sick fucks. Grab yourselves a beer, sit back, relax, and we are having a fucking conversation about this. Alright, let's get into this. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre is the name of an event that was given to the 1929 murder in Chicago of 7 men on the North Side Gang, or of the North Side Gang, during the Prohibition era. It happened on February 14th and resulted from the struggle between the Irish-American gang and the South Side Italian gang, led by none other than Al Capone, a all-time notorious Chicago gangster. Now, Al Capone wanted to take control of the organized crime in the city. Former members of the Egan's Rats gang were suspected of a significant role in the incident, assisting Capone. And this happened in front of the warehouse at Dickens and Clark in Lincoln Park, that's Chicago, Illinois, USA. This happened at around 10:30 a.m., and it involved 2 Thompson submachine guns and 2 shotguns. There were 7 people killed, 5 members of the Northside Gang, and 2 other affiliates. And, of course, none of them were identified, none of the participants were involved. The Chicago outfit, Egan's Rats, and the Purple Gang were all the perpetrators in this. And on today's date, in 1929, 7 men were murdered at the garage at 2122 North Clark Street in the Lincoln Park neighborhood on Chicago's north side. They were shot by 4 men using weapons that included 2 Thompson submachine guns and shotguns. 2 of the shooters were dressed as ununiformed policemen, while the others wore suits, ties, overcoats, and hats. Witnesses saw the police leading the other men at gunpoint out of the garage, which was not uncommon during that time, after the shooting. The victims included 5 members of the George Bugs Moran's Northside Gang. Moran's was the second in command and brother-in-law to Albert Catch-Elect, alias James Clark. He was killed alongside Adam Hayner, the gang's bookkeeper and business manager, Albert Weinshank, and I'm not joking about that name, who managed several cleaning and dyeing operations for Moran, and the gang enforcers Frank Gunsberg and Peter Gunsberg as well. 2 collaborators were also shot, Reinhard H. Schwimmer, a former gambler, optician, I can't say that word, optician, I can't fucking say it, fuck it. He turned into a gambler and a gang associate, that's the important part. And John May, who was an occasional mechanic for the Moran gang. When real Chicago police officers arrived at the scene, one of the victims, Frank Gunsberg, was actually still alive. He was taken to the hospital where doctors stabilized him for a short time. Police tried to question him as to who shot him, and he actually replied, "No one shot me." I'm not fucking kidding. He sustained 14 bullet wounds and replied, "Nobody shot me." He died about 3 hours later. The massacre was allegedly planned by the organization led by Al Capone to eliminate George Bugs Moran, the boss of the long-established Northside Gang. The former boss of the Northside Gang was Dean O'Brien. He had been murdered by 4 gunmen in his flower shop. Fucking figures. It always seems like any gangster, they either owned a cleaning store, a mechanic, or a flower shop, and I'm not sure why. That was on North State Street in 1924. After the murder of O'Brien, I'm probably going to mispronounce that every single time, each successive leader of the North Siders were also killed, allegedly by various members or associates of the Capone organization. Fun fact, Al Capone actually was caught on tax evasion. I'm not fucking joking. They could not pin any murder that he helped with or that he allegedly was a part of, but they got his ass on tax evasion, which goes to show that in the United States, you can get away with just about anything if you have enough money, so long as you pay your taxes. That's the important thing. Several factors contributed to the timing of the plan to kill George Bugs Moran. Earlier that year, Northsider Frank Gunsberg and his brother Peter unsuccessfully attempted to murder Jack McGurn. The Northside Gang was complicit in the murders of the, and I'm going to botch this, Pasquantino, Patsy Lorando, and Antoine the Scourge Lambrano. I am not Italian. I cannot fucking say these names. Both have been present of the Union Salinica, which is basically just a local mafia, and close associates of Al Capone. Fuck at these names. Moran and Capone had been vying for control for the lucrative Chicago bootlegging trade, and for those of you who don't know what bootlegging is, it's basically illegal alcohol. That's where the term actually was coined from, as most of the smuggling were actually done in boots. There would be a little hidden compartment within these boots, or on these boots, and due to the kind of clothes that they wore at the time, these were actually very easily hidden underneath clothes. And this is also where a lot of speakeasies came in. I've actually been to a speakeasy. It's quite impressive. I mean, you know there's shady shit going on in there. But, you know, you don't say shit, because you don't want to die. Anyway, the local mafia at the time were doing this bootlegging trade, and Bugs Moran had been moving into several of Capone's enterprises. Moran was muscling in on the Capone Run Dog track, or the dog track basically, in the Chicago suburbs, and he had taken over several saloons that were actually once ran by Capone, insisting that they were in his territory, which they were not. The plan was to lure Bugs Moran to the SMC Cartridge Warehouse, which is where it happened, on North Clark Street on February 14th of that year, in 29. The intention was to kill Moran and perhaps 2 or 3 of his lieutenants. It was usually assumed that the Northsiders had lured to the garage with the promise of stolen cut-rate shipment of whiskey supplied by Detroit's Purple Gang, which was an associate with Al Capone. The Gunsberg brothers were supposed to drive 2 empty trucks to Detroit that day to pick up 2 loads of stolen Canadian whiskey. All of the victims, with the exception of John May, were dressed in their best clothes, as was customary for the Northsiders and other gangsters of the time. While they were murderers, they knew how to dress. I have to say, I'm waiting for the 20s to actually roll back around so I can start wearing a vertical pinstriped black and silver suit, because I have worn one of those and I look fucking amazing in that outfit, and unfortunately they don't make any right now, so fuck them. So on Valentine's Day, which is also today, most of the Moran gang had already arrived at the warehouse by about 10:30 a.m. Moran was not there, however, having left his Parkway Hotel apartment late. As Moran and one of his men, 10 Newsbury, approached the rear of the warehouse from the side street, they saw a police car approaching the building. They immediately turned and retraced their steps, going to a nearby coffee shop because fuck that. They encountered another gang member there, Henry Gunsberg, on the street. Henry was warned and turned back. Willie Marks, also a North Side gang member, spotted the police car on his way to the garage and ducked into a doorway and jotted down the license number before leaving the neighborhood. The smart ones got the fuck out of Dodge. Capone's lookouts likely mistook one of the Moran's men for Moran himself, and probably Albert Weinshank, who was the same height and build, was actually probably mistaken for him. That morning, the physical similarity between the two men was enhanced by their dress. Both happened to be wearing the same color overcoats and hats. Witnesses outside the garage saw a Cadillac sedan pull to a stop in front of the garage. 4 men, 2 dressed in police uniform, emerged and walked inside. 2 fake officers carrying shotguns, which to anyone who knows any law enforcement knows that law enforcement does not normally carry shotguns, even in the 20s to my knowledge, and they entered the rear portion of the garage and found members of Moran's gang and 2 gang collaborators, Reinhardt and Schwimminger, and John May, who was fixing one of the trucks. The police officers then ordered the men to line up against the wall. The 2 fake police officers then signaled to the pair of civilian-clothed men who had accompanied them. 2 of the killers opened fire with Thompson submachine guns, one with a 20-round box magazine and the other with a 50-round drum. They were thorough, spraying their victims left and right, even continuing to fire after all 7 of them had hit the floor. The 7 men were ripped apart in the volley, quite literally. 2 shotgun blasts afterward all but obliterated the faces of John May and James Clark, according to the coroner's report. To give the appearance that everything was under control, the men in street clothes came out with their hands up, prodded by the 2 uniformed police officers, the fake ones. Inside the garage, the only survivors in the warehouse were Highball, May's dog, and Frank Gunsberg. Despite 14 bullet wounds, he was still conscious but died 3 hours later, refusing to utter the word about the identities of his killers, which was actually a very typical thing for mobsters to do. It was the code of silence. Even if it was against another gang, you didn't fucking say anything, because if you knew the members of another gang, you would be looked into. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre set off a public outcry that also posed a problem for all mob bosses at the time. Since it was common knowledge that Moran was hijacking Capone's Detroit-based liquor shipments, police focused their attention on Detroit, pretty much predominantly Jewish Purple Gang mugshots of Purple Gang members George Lewis, Eddie Fletcher, Phil Keywell, and his younger brother Harry. They were all picked out by landladies Mrs. Dorothy and Mrs. Overdison, who had taken in the 3 men as roomers 10 days before the massacre. Their rooming houses were directly across the street from the Clark Street garage. Later, these women wavered in their identification, and while all 3 of them, Fletcher's, Lewis, Harry, or 4 of them, I should say, Harry Keywell, were all questioned and cleared by the Chicago police. Nevertheless, the Keywell brothers, and by extension the Purple Gang, would remain ensnared in the massacre case for all time. Many also believed that the killers wanted them to believe that the police did it. Nope, I'm gonna leave that there. I'm leaving that there. I could make several jokes right now, but I'm leaving that there. February 22nd, actually, the officers were in fact called to the scene of a fire on Wood Street, ironic, where a 1927 Cadillac sedan was found disassembled and partially burned. Those monsters. How dare you? How dare you try to torch a freaking 27 Cadillac? No, seriously, do you know how much those damn things are worth? These things are worth a fucking good-sized fortune, if in good condition. Fucking bullshit. The engine number was actually traced back to a Michigan Avenue dealer, and it was determined that the car had been used by the killers. Now, the dealer had actually sold the car to a James Morton of Los Angeles. The garage had been rented by a man calling himself Frank Rogers, who gave his address as 1859 Northwest Avenue. This actually happened to be the address of the Circus Cafe, which was operated by a Clark Maddox, who was a former, the mafia. Once you're in, you never get out. Was actually a St. Louis gangster with ties to the Capone organization, the Purple Gang, and a St. Louis gang known as the Egan Rats. I do love the names they give each other, really, and you wonder why there's certain people that aren't loyal. The police could not turn up any information about the person named James Morton or Frank Rogers, but they did have a definite lead on one of the killers. Just minutes before the killings, a truck driver named Elmer Lewis had turned a corner block away from the 2122 North Clark Street and was sideswiped by what he took to be a police car. He told the police later that he had stopped immediately but was waved away by the uniformed officer, whom he had noticed was missing a front tooth. The same description of the car's driver was also given by the president of the Board of Education, H. Wallace Codwell, who had also witnessed the accident. Police knew that this description could be none other than the former member of Egan's Rats, Fred Killer Burke. Burke was a close companion of James Ray and were well known to wear police uniforms whenever a robbery spree was going to happen. Burke was also a fugitive under indictment for robbery and murder in Ohio. Police also suggested that Joseph Lorando could have been one of the killers because of his brother's recent murder by the North Side Gang. Police then actually announced that they suspected Capone gunmen John Skaltis and Albert Alsmin, as well as Jack McGurn himself, and even Frank Rio, Capone bodyguard, of the murder. Police eventually charged McGurn and Skaltis with the massacre. Now, John, along with Albert and Joseph Hoptoad, as he was also known, Jungiria, I probably botched that, were all murdered by Capone in May of 29, after Capone learned about their plan to kill him, and this was all before he went to trial. The murder charges against Jack McGurn were finally dropped because of a lack of evidence, and he was just charged with a violation of the Mann Act. He took his girlfriend, Louis Rolfe, who was also a witness against him, and he actually married her. She became known as the Blonde Alibi across state line. Blonde Alibi, because at the time, police officers could not get a spouse to testify against their whoever they married. So she was known as the Blonde Alibi, but you couldn't marry them in the state of which you were being tried for something for that reason. So he took her across state lines to marry her so that she literally could not testify against him. This is not the strangest thing that has happened in Chicago, nor will it be the last strange thing to happen in Chicago. The case actually kind of stagnated until December 14th of that year, when the Burin County, Michigan Sheriff's Department raided the St. Joseph, Michigan bungalow of Frederick Dane, the registered owner of the vehicle by Fred Killer Burke. Burke had actually been drinking that night and rear-ended another vehicle and drove off, so that kind of fucked him. Yeah, patrolman Charles Skeely pursued and finally forcing Burke off the road. As Skeely hopped on the running board, he was actually shot 3 times and died to his wounds later that night. The car was found wrecked and abandoned just outside St. Joseph and was traced to Fred Dane. By the time police photos confirmed that Dane was in fact Fred Burke, wanted by the Chicago police for his participation in the St. Valentines Massacre. He was already fucking gone. Now, when the police raided Burke's bungalow, they found a large trunk containing a bulletproof vest and almost, get this, $320,000 in bonds that were recently stolen from a Wisconsin bank. 2 Thompson submachine guns, pistols, 2 shotguns, and thousands of rounds of ammunition, and a partridge in a motherfucking pear tree. St. Joseph authorities immediately notified the Chicago police of this, who then requested that both machine guns were brought there at once. Though the then relatively new science of forensic ballistics, both weapons were determined to have been used in the massacre, which I do find very, very awesome, that even then they were able to actually do this with the limited technology that they had. One of Burke's Tommy guns had also been used in a murder in New York mobster by the name of Frankie Yale, who participated in the O'Bannerines murder, who was another mob boss. A year and a half later, unfortunately though, no further concrete evidence would surface in the massacre's case. Burke would be captured over a year later on a Missouri farm, and the case against him in the murder of Officer Scully would be the strongest. He was then tried in Michigan and subsequently sentenced to life in prison. Burke actually died in prison in 1940. Now, there's actually a bit of a legacy. The National Museum of Crime and Punishment actually has one of the bricks that was taken from the building, and it's a St. Valentine's Massacre brick. And the garage that actually stood on North Clark Street, it was actually demolished, unfortunately, in '67, and the site is now a parking lot for a nursing home. The bricks from the north wall against where the victims were actually lined up and shot were then purchased by a Canadian businessman, and for many years later were displayed in various crime-related novelty displays. Many of the original bricks were later sold individually, and now the remainder are now owned by the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. And there's actually quite a few renditions of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and it's actually been portrayed, referenced, and even emulated in some of the following. In an Al Capone film in '59, it was actually filmed by Richard Wilson, starring Rod Striger. I'm probably botching that. He actually played as Al Capone. 7 Against the Wall, also in '59, was an episode of Playhouse 90, was directed by Franklin J. Scoffinger, starring Paul Lambert as Capone. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which was in '67 film, that was directed by Roger Corman and starred Jason Robards as Al Capone. Capone in '75, this was directed by Steve Carver, starring Ben Gazzara as Capone, and even The Untouchables, the quite legendary, I've actually seen this movie. It was a 1987 film, and it was directed by Brian D. Pamela, that actually briefly mentions the massacre. It's a very good film if you've never seen it. Some of the films was Scarface, a 1932 gangster film that was actually directed by Howard Hawks. It was loosely based on the life of Al Capone and depicts a version of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And actually, Scarface is actually the real nickname of Al Capone. He actually, as the legends go, or as the story goes, he actually hit on another man's wife, not knowing she was married, and he got cut across the face, and the scars stayed, thus giving him the nickname. Some Like It Hot is another film that I'm sure most of you have heard of. That was a 1959 comedy directed by Billy Wilder, in which Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon played characters on the run after witnessing the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. That was also a very good film. And the last one was actually just released in 1991, Oscar, comedy film that was directed by John Landis, and in which Sylvester Stallone's character is said to have been at the massacre as well. And that, my friends and Murderous Horde, is all the time I have for you today, because I'm trying to get this little video out as quickly as possible, just so I can say fuck you to Manic Idiot. So yeah, fuck you, Manic. So, without further ado, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this kind of thrown together video. And as always, blessed be and stay classy.